They slapped me with a $30,000 fine for a cabin that wasn't even inside their HOA territory. And once I proved it, things took a turn I never saw coming. Picture this, I'm standing in my hand-built cedar hideaway, mug of steaming coffee in one hand, the other clutching a thick stack of legal paperwork that's about to shake my neighborhood to its core. The sharp scent of sawdust still clung to the walls from the last bits of trim work, mixing with the earthy perfume of pine needles crunching beneath my boots. And there it sat, the notice. A crisp envelope resting on my counter, shouting in bold print, $30,000 owed for an unauthorized structure. They claimed my cabin violated community covenants. Problem was, the cabin stood 847 feet outside their jurisdiction. But here's what they didn't count on: property deeds don't lie, and retired electricians with nothing left to lose aren't easy to bully. So tell me, what would you do if your HOA tried to fine you for something on your own land? And before we dive in, drop your state in the comments. I'm betting plenty of you have HOA nightmares of your own. My name is Garrett Steele. 2 years ago, I thought I had my retirement all mapped out. I was 52 then, closing out 3 decades as a union electrician with a modest savings, enough to let me spend my days tinkering in the workshop while my wife, Melody, kept watch from the kitchen window. But cancer doesn't care about plans. When Melody passed, silence swallowed our house in Pine Ridge Estates. The beige walls approved by the HOA felt like they were pressing in on me, every neat little yard reminding me of projects she and I would never finish. Then I remembered Uncle Ray's land, 40 acres of rugged Colorado foothills he'd left me years back. I hadn't set foot there much since his funeral, but suddenly, it called to me. Just 3 football fields past the last HOA street sign, suburbia ended and the wilderness began. Deer trails, real pine trees, air so sharp it almost stung your lungs. That first morning I stood there, listening to the low rumble of my diesel generator, breathing in mountain air laced with decaying leaves. I knew exactly what I needed: a cabin. Nothing extravagant. Just a place where a man could sip his coffee without some clipboard warrior measuring the height of his grass. Now, 30 years in electrical work taught me one golden rule: always pull permits first. I'd seen enough weekend warriors learn the hard way when inspectors came knocking. So before I drove a single nail, I went down to the county office. Filed everything: structural, electrical, septic. Cost me about $300 more than I liked, but those bright yellow permits would protect me. And that's when she entered the picture, Vivien Hartwell. Vivien was the kind of person who introduced herself with her title first, like it was nobility. HOA Board President, Vivien Hartwell, she'd declare, as if the words alone carried royal decree. She was 58, sharp suits tailored within an inch of their life, posture stiff enough to iron shirts on, and a smile that felt less friendly and more predatory. She ruled the 5-person HOA like it was her empire. Every mailbox painted the exact shade of forest green she approved. Every fence cut to 6 feet sharp. Flower beds dictated by her species list. And she actually carried a tape measure in her purse. I'd seen her whip it out to measure holiday decorations. To me, she embodied corporate condescension, that polite but poison tone you hear in HR seminars. She'd smile tightly at me, talking about community standards, but her eyes made it clear what she thought of blue-collar retirees like me. The day our battle began, I was fighting with a stubborn window frame when I heard the crunch of luxury tires on gravel. A pristine white Lexus rolled to the property line. Out stepped Vivien, high heels stabbing into soft earth, like she was crossing a battlefield instead of a forest. "Mr. Steele," she called, sugar dripping from her voice, "I do hope you've cleared this little project with the right authorities." I pointed to the bright yellow permit stapled to a nearby tree. "County says it's all legal, ma'am." Her smile flickered for just a moment, barely there, but I saw it. Well, county permits are one thing. HOA approval is quite another. That should have been my warning sign. But I figured common sense would prevail. Surely, even she knew HOA authority ended at the street signs. 2 weeks later, the certified letter arrived, $30,000 fine for unauthorized construction. My cabin, they claimed, violated HOA rules, even though my uncle's land had been deeded long before her precious association even existed. I sat on my half-finished porch, bitter coffee cooling in my hands, staring at those final words. Ignorance of our covenants is no excuse for flagrant violations. And in that moment, I learned something about bullies: they count on you being too tired to fight back. Well, Vivien Hartwell had counted wrong. The next morning, I figured I'd handle it the civilized way. No need for lawyers, no need for theatrics, just a phone call. We were neighbors, after all. Neighbors should be able to work things out like grown adults. I dialed her number. "Mrs. Hartwell, this is Garrett Steele. I got your letter about the cabin, but I think there's been some kind of mix-up. My property sits outside HOA lines." The pause on the other end stretched long enough for me to hear my coffee maker burbling in the background. Papers shuffled faintly, as if she were stalling. Finally, her voice came, dipped in sugar, sharpened underneath. "Mr. Steele, our jurisdiction extends to all member properties regardless of their location. The covenants are perfectly clear." "With respect, ma'am," I said, "I've got county permits showing this project's above board." "I'm sure you do." Her tone hardened. "However, our legal counsel has reviewed the situation thoroughly. The fine stands. Good day." Click. I sat there, staring at the phone, listening to the flat tone humming in my ear like I'd just slipped into a world where property lines were suggestions and HOA presidents ruled like monarchs. The smell of scorched coffee snapped me back to reality. Righteous anger doesn't stop appliances from burning. That week, her campaign began. First came the complaint to county code enforcement. She claimed I was running an unpermitted rental cabin. Irony didn't escape me, she twisted my perfectly valid permits into something shady. Then came the whispers. At the grocery store, I'd catch fragments of conversations trailing off when I walked by. "Poor man's not right since his wife passed," I heard murmured in the cereal aisle. "Grief will cloud a man's judgment. Nothing cuts deeper than your neighbors turning you into a sideshow." It felt like living in a goldfish bowl filled with piranhas. But her masterstroke was turning the neighborhood into her eyes and ears. Suddenly, whenever I drove up the mountain road, someone would appear from behind hedges, phones in hand, recording like they were suburban secret agents. Lumber deliveries brought out more of them, snapping photos as though I were some kind of exotic zoo exhibit. The breaking point came one crisp morning. A knock rattled my front door. There she stood, clipboard in hand, smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Garrett," she said, like we were old friends sharing lemonade. "I've been thinking about our situation. Perhaps we can reach an accommodation." "I'm listening." "If you halt construction immediately and remove the structure, we might reduce the fine to something more manageable. Let's say, $5,000. Consider it a gesture of goodwill for the administrative inconvenience." I stared at her, this woman standing on my porch, offering to, graciously, reduce a completely fabricated fine by 83%. Something inside me shifted. You know that moment when you realize someone thinks you're dumb enough to fall for their scam? That sharp metallic taste hits your tongue, your ears start to ring, and you know you've crossed from irritation into full-blown resolve. "Mrs. Hartwell," I said slowly, "I think it's time I did some research of my own." For the first time, her smile wavered, like a light bulb with a loose filament. That Tuesday morning found me in the basement of the Jefferson County Courthouse, armed with caffeine and stubborn determination. 3 decades of wrangling inspectors had taught me one thing: bureaucrats may be slow, but paperwork never lies. Every property line, every easement, every covenant, all filed, signed, and stamped in triplicate. The first surprise: HOA boundaries aren't suggestions. They're legally mapped, filed with the county just like city limits. The second: Uncle Ray's 40 acres had been deeded and recorded 15 years before Pine Ridge Estates even existed. My land was grandfathered, legally immune to HOA control. But the knockout punch was in the HOA's own documents. Section 12, c. For, clear as day, association authority extends only to properties within the platted boundaries recorded with Jefferson County on March 15, 2008. I read it 3 times, making sure I wasn't hallucinating under courthouse fluorescence. My cabin wasn't just outside her reach, it was untouchable. To seal the deal, I needed hard proof, not just courthouse papers, but boots-on-the-ground verification. That's when I met Rex Morrison. The county clerk recommended him with a smirk. Rex doesn't suffer fools, and he knows property law like he knows his own fence posts. Rex was 62, sun-weathered skin, battered baseball cap, and the air of a man who'd spent 4 decades fighting with stubborn landlines and winning. He listened to my story, chuckled, and adjusted his gear. "Let me guess," he said. "HOA thinks their kingdom stretches as far as they can see from their signs." "Something like that." He grinned, setting up his tripod in the misty morning air. "Son, I've seen this movie before. Satellites don't lie. Neither does a good survey." For 3 hours, I watched him work. The fog curled around his transit scope like ghosts of old disputes. Finally, Rex straightened, packed his notes, and said the words I'd been waiting for. 847 feet. Your cabin sits exactly 847 feet outside their recorded boundary. Music to my ears. I sent certified copies of the survey to every board member, stapled to a polite letter requesting they withdraw the fine and issue a written apology. Vivien's response came 2 days later: Surveyor error. Fine stands. Pay or face lien. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about boundaries anymore. This was about power. And Vivien wasn't interested in being right, she was interested in winning. Because next, she went nuclear. One bright morning, a sleek black sedan purred into my driveway. Out stepped a man whose shoes probably cost more than my mortgage payment. Perfectly cut suit, leather briefcase polished like glass. Behind him came Vivien, lips pressed into her concerned neighbor mask, clutching a manila folder thicker than a Sunday paper. "Mr. Steele," the suit said, extending a manicured hand. "Richard Blackwell, of Blackwell, Morrison, and Associates. We represent Pine Ridge Estates." I knew the name. Billboards along Highway 6 bragged about protecting community standards, with smiling attorneys posed in front of gated neighborhoods. Translation: professional HOA enforcers. Blackwell popped open his briefcase with the flair of a magician. "We're here to discuss your unfortunate violation." He slid across a 23-page cease and desist order. Dense legal jargon, whereas, this, and, heretofore, that, all boiling down to, stop building or we'll make your life miserable. But while Blackwell droned about harmony and compliance, Vivien wandered my yard like a predator sniffing for prey. Through the kitchen window I watched her measuring my fence-to-sidewalk distance, photographing my mailbox, even counting decorative rocks in my flower bed. And then it hit me, she wasn't after my cabin anymore. She was building a laundry list of petty violations, ammunition to bleed me dry. Sure enough, the letters came. Mailbox 2.3 inches too close to the sidewalk, $500 fine. Fence stain faded beyond acceptable standard, $750 fine. Truck parked in driveway classified as commercial vehicle, $1,200 fine. My kitchen table turned into a minefield of violation notices, legal letters, and threats of liens. I sat there, the bitter smell of coffee in the air, drowning in bureaucratic quicksand. And then I remembered something my old union steward used to say. When management starts swinging lawyers like clubs, it's time to learn their game. That was the moment I stopped being reactive. If Vivien wanted a war, I'd meet her in the trenches she thought she owned, the paperwork battlefield. So I headed back to the courthouse, but this time, not for property lines. No, this time I wanted to peek under the hood of how the HOA really operated. Turns out, Homeowners associations have to file annual reports with the Colorado Secretary of State. Budgets, expenses, the whole paper trail. Most folks never look at them. But I wasn't most folks anymore. Buried in the numbers, I found gold. Pine Ridge Estates pulled in about $180,000 a year from dues and fees. That made sense, 120 homes at around $1,500 each. But here's what didn't, almost $45,000 of that was spent on legal fees. A quarter of the entire budget. For a sleepy neighborhood where the biggest drama was usually over Christmas lights. Then came the kicker, in just 18 months, Blackwell, Morrison and Associates had raked in $67,000 from our HOA. 67 grand, in a community where people got fined for planting the wrong flowers. Either we were the most lawsuit-happy neighborhood in Colorado history, or somebody was bleeding us dry. I decided to test a theory. That evening, I started knocking on doors. Ever get a legal letter from the HOA? I asked. The answers stacked up fast. Martha Henderson, fined $800 for roses instead of marigolds. Bob Schmidt, $1,500 for a satellite dish. Jennifer Walsh, cease and desist for running a home-based accounting business. Every case followed the same pattern, violation notice threatening letter from Blackwell's firm homeowner paid up instead of fighting. The puzzle pieces clicked into place. Vivien wasn't protecting community standards. She'd turned the HOA into her personal cash cow, with Blackwell as her collection muscle. But what she didn't count on was me being retired, angry, and in no hurry to quit. I filed a formal complaint with the Colorado Department of Regulatory Agencies. Then I mailed every homeowner a letter breaking down the $67,000 in enforcement fees, and asking one simple question: where's all our money really going? Vivien's reply arrived by certified mail, a threat of defamation charges for spreading false information. Only this time, her tone felt less like intimidation and more like panic. She was slipping. And sure enough, she doubled down with her next move, an emergency community meeting. Flyers went under every door. The subject line read, "Urgent community safety concerns regarding rogue member actions." Translation, she was coming for me. Thursday evening, the community center was packed. Rain misted against the windows, carrying that sharp pine smell of an oncoming storm. I walked in carrying foam boards stacked under my arm, aerial photos, boundary maps, and copies of the HOA's financial reports. Rex was right beside me, survey maps rolled up like artillery shells. Vivien stood at the podium in her navy blazer, smile polished but stretched thin. "Thank you all for attending," she began. "We're here tonight to discuss serious issues of harassment, misinformation, and disruptive behavior from one member of our community." She gestured toward me like I was a stray dog that had wandered in. That was my cue. I rose, foam board in hand. "Before we talk about harassment, Mrs. Hartwell, could you explain exactly where the HOA's legal authority begins and ends?" Her eyes flickered. "Our authority extends to all member properties, as clearly outlined in the covenants." I flipped open the first board, revealing a county aerial map with red highlighted HOA boundaries. "According to Jefferson County records, jurisdiction stops here, Granite Ridge Road." "My cabin?" I pointed. 847 feet outside it. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Martha Henderson raised her hand. "If his land's outside the boundary, why are we fining him for it?" Vivien's smile hardened. "Property boundaries are more complex than simple survey lines. Our covenants include." "No, they don't." The voice came from the back. Rex had arrived, rolling out the official county survey map like a general unrolling a battle plan. "Boundaries aren't complex," he said flatly. "They're surveyed, recorded, and enforceable. And this cabin? It sits on land that predates your HOA by 15 years. The room erupted, neighbors leaning forward, pointing at maps, asking questions. Vivien froze, her composure cracking. Then came the hammer blow. From the front row, Josephine Carter, 78 years old, barely 5 feet tall, stood up with a cardboard box in her hands. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said, voice calm but carrying like a church bell, "I think it's time we reviewed my late husband's files." She set the box down with a thud that echoed through the hall. "Harold was treasurer here for 12 years. He kept records of everything. Bank statements, receipts, minutes, all cross-referenced. Before his stroke, he noticed irregularities." Vivien's face went pale. Josephine pulled out a folder labeled Discrepancies, 2019 to 2022. Inside were bank records, showing checks to fake vendors, triple-priced invoices for legal work, and payments to a shell company called Pineridge Property Management LLC, registered, conveniently, to Vivien's own home address. Gasps filled the room. "Harold calculated nearly $47,000 in unexplained expenditures," Josephine said, her eyes locked on Vivien. "Money that should have gone to playgrounds, snow removal, actual maintenance. Funny how it disappeared after you took over his duties." Vivien's hands trembled, her voice breaking. That's false. He was confused after his stroke." Josephine's gaze turned arctic. "My husband's mind was sharp as ever. And I think this community deserves to see the truth." The documents spread across the table like evidence in a courtroom. And at that moment, everyone in the room saw Vivien not as their president, but as a thief. The storm had broken. Vivien didn't retreat, she escalated. Cornered narcissists don't back down, they torched the whole room. It started with sabotage. One night, my new security camera caught a figure in dark clothing trying to smash my generator with a crowbar. The expensive boots gave her away. Vivien had crossed from legal intimidation into criminal destruction. The footage went straight to the sheriff. Within 24 hours, she was charged with vandalism and trespassing. Her squeaky clean image cracked like thin ice. Word spread fast, faster than any rumor she'd ever planted. Neighbors who'd kept silent for years suddenly found courage. Stories poured out, bogus fines, intimidation, harassment. The hunter had become the hunted. Her counterattack came next. Flyers appeared on windshields calling me a mentally unstable widower fixated on harassing the HOA. Fake Facebook profiles started posting in local groups about my erratic behavior. It was textbook discredit the whistleblower. But then our investigation uncovered something bigger. Tom Bradley, retired IRS auditor, traced HOA payments through a maze of shell companies. Turns out Vivien wasn't just siphoning a few thousand here and there. She'd built an entire fraud network, inflated contracts, fake vendors, kickbacks. Not $47,000 stolen, but closer to $180,000, spread across multiple HOAs. We weren't just dealing with one crooked president. This was organized corruption. Vivien's desperation peaked with her dirtiest trick yet, an anonymous tip to Child Protective Services, claiming I was a danger to kids in the neighborhood. The caseworker, Janet Sullivan, showed up with weary eyes that had seen every flavor of spiteful complaint. I poured her coffee, showed her the security footage of Vivien with the crowbar, Harold Carter's meticulous records, and the mountain of evidence against the HOA. Janet snapped her notebook shut. "Mr. Steele, in my experience, thieves rarely file child safety reports out of genuine concern. Consider this case closed." But CPS wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something Vivien couldn't control, the press. Channel 7 called, then the Denver Post, then even national outlets sniffing around the story of HOA corruption turned federal case. Vivien thought she could outshine it all with a press conference at the community center. She strutted in with talking points and a slideshow about protecting property values. What she didn't expect. Nearly 80 homeowners packed in, clutching violation notices and copies of Harold's records. It started unraveling when a reporter asked, Why did HOA funds pay $23,000 to a management company registered at your home address? Her smile faltered. Those are complex arrangements. Where's the playground fund? Someone shouted. 3 years, no playground. And then Josephine stood up, Harold's folder in her hands. Nothing about HOA finances should be confidential from the people who pay for them. The room erupted. Jennifer Walsh asked the killing blow, if Garrett's claims are frivolous, why did you try to vandalize his property with a crowbar? Dead silence. Vivien's composure shattered. She ranted about conspiracies, shouted at the media, and stormed toward the door. But she never made it. Sheriff's Deputy Martinez was waiting with handcuffs. Fraud, embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty. Cameras rolled as she was led away, screaming about frame jobs and witch hunts. The revolution was complete. But it didn't end there. The federal case spread like wildfire. Investigators connected Vivien's schemes to 4 other HOAs, uncovering millions in stolen funds. 17 arrests. $2.3 million recovered. At the next emergency HOA meeting, FBI agents presented our evidence on projectors. Homeowners sat in stunned silence, realizing their petty fines and HOA battles had funded vacations, luxury cars, and Shan companies. Then Josephine Carter, 78 years old and 5 feet of steel backbone, took the mic. Harold always said democracy only works when good people stand up to bullies. For too long, we stayed quiet. But this week proved that neighbors working together can topple even the worst corruption. The ovation shook the walls. Vivien and her cronies were removed unanimously. Bogus fines erased. A new board elected. And with it came the Pine Ridge Transparency Covenant, open audits, public budgets, and homeowner approval for all big expenses. And me? They formally voided my $30,000 fine and issued an apology. But the real victory wasn't paperwork. It was what came after. The stolen playground funds built something real, the Harold Carter Memorial Playground, honoring the man whose careful records had lit the fuse. Josephine cried when she saw neighborhood kids playing on swings that corruption had once stolen. My cabin, just a modest grief project, became a symbol of resistance. Neighbors would point it out, that's where the HOA revolution began. 6 months later, Vivien was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. The judge's words cut to the core, the defendant violated the fundamental trust of her community, turning service into theft. Our story even pushed lawmakers to pass the Pine Ridge Reform Act, creating strict financial oversight for HOAs statewide. Other states followed suit. And me? I found purpose again. Rex and I started a business, Boundary Solutions LLC, helping homeowners fight HOA abuse. Josephine became our moral compass, traveling to other neighborhoods as the HOA whistleblower. Now, as I sit on my cabin's porch, coffee in hand, I can hear kids laughing on Harold Carter's playground. The air smells like pine and possibility. Melody would have loved it. She always believed neighbors could overcome anything if they stood together. Turns out, she was right. On the cabin wall hangs Josephine's handwritten note, Harold would be proud. And here's what I learned, bullies count on you being too tired, too scared, or too alone to fight back. But if you document everything, rally your neighbors, and refuse to bow, even the worst corruption can't survive the light. So now I'll ask you, what's your worst HOA nightmare? Drop it in the comments, you're not alone. And if you love seeing bullies get their downfall served cold, hit that subscribe button. Because next week, I'll tell you how I helped my elderly neighbor get payback against the contractor who nearly stole her life savings. Sometimes, fighting back isn't just about you. It's about protecting those who can't protect themselves.